Welcome to Branching Out, Growing Together, the podcast that explores growth, sustainability, and new opportunities in farming. Join your host, Melanie Jones, as she shares stories and insights from farmers and innovators who are making a difference in agriculture today. And now, here's your host, Melanie Jones.
Well, welcome back to another episode of Branching Out, Growing Together. Today we have a special guest, Michael Parks. And Michael, I appreciate you taking time out of your day to share some ideas and thoughts with us.
Oh, not a problem. I enjoy it.
Good deal. Well, it wasn't too long ago that Buzz Ferver joined the podcast. And I feel like Buzz is kind of a character, And
Yeah.
and he said, you need to talk to Michael Parks, but because he's quite a character.
Oh boy.
And yeah, so I said to myself, we've got to connect and get you on. So, like I said, I appreciate it. This is the first time we've done the podcast with no video, and part of the reason for that is that you don't have a camera, and you're a little bit on the low tech side, but you're okay with that. And as I mentioned, I was thinking about, I wonder what our listeners think about low tech versus high tech. And do you have any thoughts on that? Just like you're doing what you do every day, but not fully connected to technology solutions.
Well, I think a lot of people may forget what it was like before the internet was even around.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you might draw a line somewhere around 93 or 94 or something when the internet became a thing.
Yeah.
So before that, if you wanted to know about something, it was go to the library and check out a book and read about it. There wasn't this instantaneous, knowledge base waiting for you to ask it a question.
Yes.
So,
And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I was thinking one time when Greg Miller was talking about mailing chestnut and seed nut samples to one another, that he'd go down to the post office and get an envelope and write it out and mail it, and how just our society is fast forwarded. It's just such a fast pace, like you said.
Yeah, well, I guess, I was a kid when I started getting into chestnuts, and you just look around and ask somebody who happened to be at the park where we were, what is this thing I'm looking at? I mean,
Yeah, go to the library and hope there's a book.
Nowadays, you take a picture of it with your phone, it would tell you more than you want to know.
That's true. So I have this quote that says, audio content helps to let me know that I'm not alone, that others share my ideas, hopes, aspirations, and that I have a sense of community. So there's positives for remaining a little low tech, but there's also positives for using technology in the sense of this podcast. And so I thought that was a check in the good column for it. But the chestnut community has been evolving for quite some time in the US, and you're one of those people that's been around and collaborating with lots of people like James Nave, for example. I think the two of you have gone back and forth a bit over the years, and so I thought that'd be a good place to kind of dive in a little further. Is what has your journey been like?
Well, I guess we could go back to the first time I ever saw a chestnut. That was probably about 1973. We switched our family reunion area, and we started going to a place called McNair Day Park in St. Charles, Missouri. And I guess I was probably 12 or something. It must have been mid-September, and the only reason I can tell you that is because chestnuts were dropping.
There you go.
And
That's
so,
right.
We get there, and all the adults are doing the things that adults do, and I'm scrambling around climbing up trees, and I find this burr on the ground full, just barely opened. And so, intrigued, I pry it open and stab myself in the thumb and look inside, and there's these beautiful shiny red nuts, and I'm like overwhelmed. Oh my gosh, look at this thing. Well, and then I get inside of it, and it's like velvet inside, like a little purse holding these precious little jewels, and I'm like fell in love immediately. I'm like, I'm going to have these one of these days.
That is fantastic. So fast forward from you, little boy up in the tree getting little spikes in your hands, to how did you progress as an adult to end up in farming?
Well, I had a regular job and I knew that, someday I was going to buy some property. So when I became old enough to actually do such a thing, I found a piece of land that I wanted. It was just a cow pasture. And then it became where to source the chestnut seed that I was going to plant. Well, I went to Asian grocery stores and of course they sell them. So I bought, I don't know, 50 of them. And then I remembered the park and I made a pilgrimage back there and collected another 100 or so. And I came out here and planted them in a big long row out in the middle of the cow pasture. And we didn't live on the property. So then those trees eventually would grow up to where I could start transplanting them out into a row. And, you know,
Yeah.
then I was an
You
owner of chestnut trees, but I had no idea or thoughts of what I was even going to do with them.
Isn't that true? Do you feel like you're more of a tinkerer, a scientist, or you're really producing a big crop to sell, or is it a little bit of all of that?
Well, when starting out, like I said, I didn't really have like an end goal, like, oh, I'm going to make a bunch of money or I'm going to be famous or any of that stuff. It was just, I want these things. Then when I had a first crop, I had to decide, okay, now that I have these things, what am I going to do with them? So I went back to that same store that I bought those from, whatever it was 10 years earlier. And I brought a bag of them in, and the man looked at them. He looked at me and said 2 words: "We buy." So,
Yeah, you wonder if the source that they had been using before was in the US or imported. That'd
I would
be
assume that they were imported.
Yeah, that's what I would assume too. So I bet he was thrilled to say, "Wow, these were picked up yesterday," or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. And he was a very good gentleman. I still know him to this day. And every year I would go in and I would have more. And I would ask him, how are the customers? Oh, they love it. Um, then I learned to graft just because I like to do plants in general. So I thought it was time to up my game and start
Mhm.
growing grafted varieties. So then I was looking around to what do people think. If I'm going to grow a grafted variety, I want to grow the best tasting thing possible. And then the amount that I get will come later, right? So
True.
asking around, it seemed as though people thought that the variety eaten had the best flavor. So that's what I went with. I started grafting those, and it just turned out that that was also the earliest variety to drop. And I thought, ooh, well, then if there was competition, I would beat them to the market then because I had the early variety.
Well, I saw a picture which we'll post on this of some beautiful eaten chestnuts, um, along with Ching, right?
Right.
The story must have fast forwarded to that a little bit.
Well, then what I decided was since you need a pollinator, then okay, if Eaton is the best, then where's my second best? And people had raved about Ching, and then I realized that Ching would start to come on as Eaton was waning. That would give
Hmm.
me a nice steady flow instead of a great big dump all at once. And I could continue to sell fresh product. And they don't look exactly the same, but they're fairly similar. It's not like a really dark one and a really light one.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So
And
that kind of,
how are you selling those today? Does it I'm just curious if you're not using technology as much, how do you sell them?
well, I would not say that I don't use technology now. It's just that a camera is not something that I ever found necessary to have because I don't
Sure.
do the Zoom, or what do they call them?
Zoom.
Well, Zoom thing is one, but the Skype, you know, I,
Okay.
I'm not doing any of that. So what I ended up doing was after I had, you know, exhausted this particular store because he's like, okay, well, that's all we can take. And I had more. Then I went to another store across town and they were
Okay.
just as willing to take them on.
Yeah.
And I would go in any place I thought there was even a possibility that somebody would want a chestnut.
Yeah.
So I
That's
went,
great. And once you get a customer, it's usually if you do a good job, they stay a customer. So you can kind of
absolutely.
anticipate that. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, that's
the only caveat there is that I did chain retail, nationwide type grocery stores, and I found that they really don't understand chestnuts, and the turnover was such that every year I would have to go in, re-educate the produce manager about what it is, what you do with it, when you put it out, where you put it out, and then the next year I would start all over again.
yeah.
So
Yeah, that gets
it
old.
it became not worth it to even bother with them.
Mhm. And do
One time
you
I went into a
oh,
particular one of the three stores that I was servicing, and I said, well, how are your chestnuts moving? You need any more? And he said, I don't know. It's not Thanksgiving yet. I haven't put them out.
gosh. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we talk a lot on the podcast and just the chestnut community in general needing to educate consumers. And it sounds like you started that way back when of whether they're Asian cultures or others that this is how this works and this is what you can do with it. And we've got a long ways to go to to increase the number of people that really count on chestnuts during the second part of the year.
Yeah, you'll find it's an ethnic thing. People, certain cultures have a tradition of chestnut eating, or they don't.
Mm,
So I found that some of my customers here would be from Bosnia, that area. Seems to be a big chestnut eating group. Um, there were some Turkish folks that I ran into that as soon as they found out I had them, they were just like, more, bring them more, So
And
you just,
you don't know. Do you have people to come out and do you pick or you're primarily gathering?
well, we did that, I guess I would say for 2 years. But what I found was that even though the people were very nice, they were, it was hard to keep them corralled. I kept telling them, okay, here are your gloves to use. Do not mess with the burrs. Pick the nuts up, leave the burrs alone. Oh, we want to
Mhm.
be helpful and pick them up. Then they're picking them up anyway, even though I asked them, please don't do that. Then they're throwing them into piles. Then they're throwing them and hitting each other. And I'm like, this is going to get me in trouble,
Mm. So the return wasn't really there for the amount of babysitting per se and liability issues, I guess, as well.
And what I ran into is that over the years, I found that the people that want to buy them for seed to grow trees, they like a larger nut. They want to plant something impressive. So if I had the U pick, those folks would be also hauling off a certain percentage of my larger nuts that really I wanted to save. And they probably would be okay if I told them we're going to go to the station here and you're going to dump them out and I'm going to cherry pick all the big ones out. But that just seemed like it wasn't really that, productive of a system.
Yes, yes. I've got pictures to share of your orchard. So give us an inside scoop of like how many trees and are they different ages or did you plant them all? I guess once you started grafting, you had them at different varying ages.
Yeah, what happened basically was I put in my initial trees and I thought, well, that'll probably be it because we also planted, Carpathian walnuts and pecans and pretty much anything you can name, really. Uh, so then I had, let's say 30 trees out. And then when I went to go sell my first crop and I realized there was an actual demand for them, well, I put another 100 out that next year.
Okay, yeah, that's good. Um, and so are you primarily you have Eaton and Ching are your babies?
There's another, odyssey. I started out wanting a uniform crop to sell for food. And then somebody said, "Oh man, you got to try this variety. I'll send you wood." I'd stick it on there. Then the next year, somebody told me about two more. So now I've got like 15 different kinds out here. And that runs counter to the original idea of a uniform crop. But now I'm selling seed. So it really doesn't matter. People want the oddities. And so it's all evolved constantly.
Yes. Yeah, well, that's
You know,
good. That's what life is, and you are a little bit of a tinkerer, experimenting, um, every day that goes forward. So that's what we need to be doing.
yeah, I
Uh,
think I'm the classic example of a person that can do a whole lot of things pretty well, but I'm not the best at anything I do that, compared to there's always somebody better out there.
or they think they're better,
Well,
but
like on YouTube now, when we were in our band as kids, we were the best band we knew because we didn't know any other bands.
mhm,
Now you get on there and there's a 12-year-old girl kicking your butt.
it's funny. So you have a variety of trees, not just chestnuts, and so you considered that's your primary job right now, is maintaining all the different types of plants and trees and so forth?
Yeah, I have retired about a year ago now. So, yeah, I can concentrate a little bit more. And uh, what I found is that you get, let's say, for any given tree, maybe 6, 8, 10 years of free. And then all of a sudden the pests find you.
Okay.
Then you
So,
have to start working around what the pests are doing to your product without spraying, because I told myself from day one, we're not going to use pesticides, herbicides, any of that stuff.
yeah, so are you considered an organic?
We are organic, although I did
Yeah,
not go through the process of having somebody tell me that I'm doing what I already know I'm doing. So we're not certified.
yeah.
But I mean, I don't have anything against people that do the certified thing. That's cool.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Have you seen much growth or interest in the chestnut community from your standpoint over, say, when you started?
Oh, I would have to say it's exploded.
Yeah.
If anything, I'm more concerned that they're going to turn it into a commodity like soybean and corn, and people will say, how many bushels per acre are you getting, instead of how good does this chestnut taste and peel?
Yes. Yeah, I
you
think
know,
I think I mean it's very possible that that could happen, but I think there's always going to be a segment of our population that hasn't even learned about the chestnut yet, that can be more of the the chefs and the home cooks and people that are just very interested in the heritage and stuff. And it's like, I just love that story of when you were a little boy and you opened up the burr and saw these beautiful nuts, and the passion that comes from that, because we see that from so many people that are consumers, but also those are just getting into this field. So hopefully we can have a nice balance of supply and demand.
right. What, and I don't know if this, becomes a sore subject or anything, but there are programs now through the government where you can get, lots of money and credits and everything to go out and plant massive numbers of chestnut trees without even knowing anything about chestnut trees, or perhaps even caring, unless you can turn them into dollar bills.
That's right. Well, I think anyone that's had trees knows that that doesn't really work, because there's just too many pieces of the puzzle of having chestnut orchards. And not only do we know that from what we're doing at United Chestnuts, but my husband and I just got back from visiting with Bob Staley of Ohio Chestnuts and Greg Miller at Route 9 and Empire. And, just to hear all that they've gone through in their organizations, and it's a full-time job. It's not something you can just plant and walk away and go collect a check. It just isn't.
Well, and those guys are the giants in the industry, and I would be a grasshopper, standing next to them.
Well, we're all in this together, it does take all of us. But I mean, at the end of the day, they're just the nicest people in the world, and you can just see how they're innovating, just like all of us are, because based on need in our situations. I think Buzz was telling me that you like to kind of invent things. Was that right?
Well, I maybe would try. It depends on what we're talking about in particular.
Okay. I thought I remembered him saying that you were very innovative.
Well, I'm not a person that would pat myself on the back for anything I've done. So anything that I've had to quote invent would just be due to necessity that I have a problem. I need to fix this problem. What am I going to do? Right.
That's right.
And I don't
And you
have a ton
find,
of money
okay.
to go
So
out and
you,
buy the biggest, processor, harvester, whatever.
mhm. Do you take find a lot of joy from what you're doing, but also the innovation that has to occur to continue to get better and advance? Like, is it fun for you?
Yeah, it's really what gets me up in the morning. I just love the trees. Even if I couldn't sell them, I would still have them, and I don't even know what I would do with them, but I just love it. It's like the greatest creation in my mind.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. It's just, so we always said, well, what if something did happen and you couldn't sell your goods? There's just so much joy that comes from walking through orchards and seeing trees and the wildlife that's around it. It's really soothing, but it's also joy filled to think, wow, we can introduce something that really is such a neat product that's healthful, to many, many, many people that just don't know. So I think
Yeah,
discussions like this
even
are helpful.
even the smell of the flowers when they first started coming on, I thought, wow, that's really not an attractive smell. But then over the years, it became like the exact opposite to where I wouldn't want to live without that smell anymore.
Yeah, that's because it's part of it's part of the process too, isn't it?
Right.
Like, um,
It
so
kind of
have you,
reminds me of when I was a kid. I dated this girl, and her perfume to me immediately smelled like bug spray. But then within 6 months, I was like, can I have some of that to take home with me?
funny, what did you do before before you retired? What was your career?
Oh, I was just an average guy that would work either driving a truck. I managed a warehouse.
Mhm.
Um, I worked in a feed mill. Um, Actually, I worked at Hark for a year out there at the Horticulture Agroforestry Research Center.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that was around 2005, maybe. So I went to the National Nut Growers Association meeting in 2004, and I met Ken Hunt, who is another giant in chestnuts. And he happened to live close by here and kind of became a mentor of mine. So that whole summer, I just picked his brain until he said, I've never even heard that question before.
Yeah, I
uh,
think there's a lot of people that could chip in and write a very interesting book. I know that there's some older ones that I think it was Buzz was it, we included that in his podcast, but um, think times are changing, and I don't know. I think that since we sell trees, chestnut trees and nuts, we just talked to a lot of people who are loving this idea of leaving the bigger cities, leaving corporate jobs if they can to have their own piece of land and do something that's good for the soul. And hopefully there's a way to help sustain that lifestyle. So chestnuts potentially could do that, but it is a lot of hard work and not necessarily inexpensive either.
no, and I did mine on a, as you go shoestring budget. So I would have no idea what kind of money I've put in. I know I've gone
Hmm.
through three riding lawnmowers in these 30 years.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. What do you think of the term sustainability? Like, is that something that's in your conversation, or it's a word that's thrown around a lot, but are you doing anything that's puts you in that conversation?
Well, we do that by necessity, not because it's trendy. I put in a pond because I wanted to irrigate the trees at that critical moment that they need
Mm-hmm.
it. And yet I'm not going to run a hose out there and spray, city chlorine water on them for days and days to get, to get
Mm-hmm.
the soil wet. So we dug a pond and then we pump out of that pond onto the field. Um, like I said, chestnut trees really don't need any fertilizer, so there's no reason for me to spend the money on it. When it comes time to
True.
weed, I weed whip around with a gas powered weed whip and, get around the tree. Then we mow it nice and clean and short for harvest. All the burrs go in a pile and then they get burned. Now, maybe composting would be better, but I've heard that you run into pest issues if you leave burrs around.
Yeah. I know that Greg Miller and Bob Staley both said that they just leave them there to become, kind of going back into the soil. But there's different perspectives and also different areas. What kind of pests are around that might contribute to that?
So they leave them on the orchard floor.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah,
See,
we've been doing that.
we're crawling around on our hands and knees with gloves picking them up, and that just wouldn't do to have last year's burrs out there.
Yeah.
So right now, if you go out to my orchard, there's not a burr on the ground unless it fell within the last day, because I go back there and pick them all up and throw them in a wheelbarrow and coat them off into the pile.
Okay.
But I understand if there's another way to do it, that's just as viable as my way.
Absolutely. I think that's the fun of it too, is the testing. And um, I have to say that I was looking through some emails and I saw that you had written to me a while back, and I guess I missed it, but you were asking about tissue culture.
Right.
With we had Craig Clark from West Coast Chestnuts on it. And so that's something that interests you. Would you like to get connected to Craig and see about that?
Well, what happened was I had two folks working on it, and um, for whatever reason, the first folks that were working on it, even though I think they're outstanding people, they had issues with, I guess, what you might call infection, to where the culture did not continue. Then I
Mm.
had someone else working on it, and it was during COVID. Everything was going smoothly, and then a worker during the weekend shut the power off to the lab and killed everything that she had done.
Oh my gosh.
So
Okay.
what I was, hoping for was to get this black satin under tissue culture, and then it would be available on its own roots, and it would just be, more, even more ideal than having a grafted tree.
Yes, for sure. Well, we'll make sure you guys get together because you're both doing interesting things. So that's very sad though about all that work kind of for nothing.
Well, COVID did that all across the board, all across the world, and everything you can think of.
Oh, I know it. I know. It was a rough time and we're still recovering in so many ways.
Right.
Um, I do have one more question. Brad Russell from Chestnuts of the Ozarks was on the podcast last month, and he talked a lot about soil health. So I was wondering, is that something that you focus on um, in any particular way?
Well, I guess we were blessed with pretty good soil here.
Okay.
So, what I haven't really done is even bothered to have it tested, because when the trees grew and started producing with no fertilizer, then that's what I needed done. I didn't, I have a lot of people that would call me and ask me, they'll read some literature about, make $6,000 per acre growing chestnuts. And they'll ask me, well, how many pounds of chestnuts do you get per tree? And
Mm-hmm.
well, if I give you an answer, it would just be to satisfy your curiosity, because in any one year, that tree is going to make 30, 40, 50, or 10, depending on, what happened that year. Right. So,
Exactly.
as far as like trying to pin down certain variables, oh, I'm going to make this much per, you know, tree or acre or whatever. Yeah, I'd say, short answer, if you're in it for the money, get out.
Yeah, I think we've discovered that too. It's just you either love it, and it's a passion, just being out there and solving problems. Um, and if you don't, you better hire someone that does, right? That's the other way around it, is just someone's got to love and understand the problems, the puzzle pieces and everything like that. But all that kind of talk is balanced by how much fun it is.
Yeah, I love the fact that I've lived on this property now for I think 35 years. And if I'm paying attention, I can go out there and see something I've never seen before almost every day.
Yeah.
There will be some
That's
little creature, there will be, something that I can say, wow, look at that.
You're more like my husband, and I'm trying to get better at that. I'm pretty immersed in technology, and I travel to big cities for my job, and I've been learning to go on walks without my AirPods so that I can so that I can hear the birds and the sounds. And I think that's a great lesson for many of us to learn, like to slow down and look what's around us. So,
I would never assume that there's all these creatures that live on my property, because you don't see them until one day you do, and you're like, okay, what is that? That is a fat-headed skink. No, that's a blue-tailed skink. Oh, that's you know, it's just amazing. I saw a butterfly the other day that I've never seen. It looked like a great big old dead leaf on the side of my tree. And I reached
wow.
up to kind of go, what is that? And it flew away. I'm like, holy moly.
Well, I learned from a customer last week about an app called Merlin, where I think it was Stanford or somewhere, some university developed it. And if you hear a bird, you open the app and you record it, and then it'll tell you what it is. So
That is so cool.
isn't that cool? Like there are ways for technology and nature to come together to make a better Earth. We just got to get going at a faster pace to figure it all out.
Well,
Um,
I wouldn't want anybody to come away with thinking that I have anything but, great love for technology. It's just that if I don't specifically need that one thing, then I don't know anything about it. And I really don't even care to learn, because I'm not, you know what I mean? There's too many other things to.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, and I didn't even mean to open up like that. I just thought it was interesting, that you were going through this new process of doing this with me, and that's so good for all of us to be doing new things. I mean, the podcast is branching out, growing together. It's not all about growing trees; it's growing as people. And so I appreciate you doing this with me.
Yeah,
Um,
great point.
any last words for listeners just thinking about being in this business, or anything to be aware of, or just a thought that you might have?
Well, for me, I'd say if you're a man and you're growing chestnut trees, have a good wife, because if it wasn't for my wife, I probably wouldn't be able to do half of what I do.
Yeah.
She's
Teamwork.
supportive, she's interested, she's out there with me as a partner. If I threw my back out, then I wouldn't be able out there doing it, but she will. And
Yeah.
now, one time I told her I was going to plant a whole nother front field, and she looked at me and just said, if you plant another chestnut tree, I'm gonna. And it's okay. Gotcha.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I love her already.
Yeah, she's a wonderful woman.
Yeah, that's great, Michael. Well, I guess we'll wrap up here, and so appreciate the time, and hopefully this is interesting for our listeners, and you and I'll catch up soon.
Okay, Millie, I appreciate you
Thank
and
you.
what you're doing.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
People often ask Brad and Melanie Jones what a UMCA PQK seedling is. The University of Missouri Center for Agroforestry seedlings descend from an orchard with 3 well-characterized grafted cultivars. Peach, Ching, and Cork, the orchard environment generated a seedling population of 3 full sibling families. As an approved growing partner for the university, Brad and Melanie are thrilled to offer the UMCA PQK seedlings from their Kentucky-based nursery, United Chestnut. Visit unitedchestnuts.com for more information about this seedling and others available. consider subscribing to the weekly blog and tuning into the Chestnut Industry podcast, Branching Out. That was UnitedChestnuts.com.